something that I found very interesting from Tom Elmhirst on Dave Pensado's Place from 12 years ago was a very helpful tip. Now, if you're not familiar with Tom, he's the one who did Rolling in the Deep, Adele. He mixed it. He also did Rehab by Amy Winehouse. Now, both of those songs specifically have a very great vibe to them, but you can also turn them up super loud. They sound amazing no matter what volume you listen at. And his methods of how he mixes are very interesting. I did a thing on his mix bus a little while back because the Strokes mix bus where Ben Babty basically learned from Tom. And because of that, they do a very similar kind of mix bus thing. Tom's thing is curve bender into Manley Varimu on his mix bus. He uses a Neve VR console to do a lot of the EQing, but the way he uses it is very interesting. So I'm going to throw on this video and then we'll do my takeaways on it. But the thing with the way he works on the console is he's mainly cutting. He mainly cuts at a very high Q, and then he works more time on balance, and less thought goes into exactly what EQ needs to happen on each instrument. Sure, there's some EQing, but the way he thinks about it is more broad scopes of if there's low end that's too much, let's bring down the entire fader of whatever low end instruments there are that are giving us too much low end. But there's a lot to this, so check this out. Well, then we'll talk about it in a second. This is fair use for teaching purposes, fair use for teaching purposes. Here we go.
I get bogged down in the EQing process, and I sometimes I tend to focus too much on the things I like that's already there, and you've disciplined yourself and trained yourself to kind of initially focus on the things that aren't working, the things that you want gone. And
yeah, absolutely.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit, because I think that's very instructive, and I think that's so cool. I might have to kind of alter my ways when I talk to you about that.
I won't go that far. What did we used to be called before we were mix engineers, Dave? We were called balance engineers, right? That's what I do. Yeah. So I use faders to do EQ. Why not? If you want less low end, pull down the things that have got low end in them.
Amen, brother.
Do you know? I mean, I know how to use a filter. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a complete idiot. But what I do is I take out things I don't like. And generally, and I don't want to get numbers, but they're sort of 2 to 5K, aren't they? Those sort of what I call, ear-splitting frequencies. And, most times I don't add a lot on the console. I'm taking away very high Q. I'm just taking away the things I don't like. And then I'm spending a lot of time, or 25 minutes, with the faders. Balance. It's everything.
I was enthralled by the way, when I saw the plugin that you used on Rehab on Amy Winehouse when you were mixing that, you took out like 18 dB around 400, 900, and I remember 3K, and I can't remember the fourth frequency, but I've never. If I looked over at my Pro Tools screen and saw that, I would have a heart attack. I'd have to go, God.
So don't look at the screen. Don't look at the screen.
I know. It's so hard though, Tom. I mean.
Why? I don't look at the screen. Well, I mean, of course you look at it, but I tell you what, when I looked at it again recently, I was a bit freaked out. But what the hell? The record sounded all right, didn't it? Kind of.
Dude, that's one of my, that and what you did with Rollin' in the Deep on Adele.
Yeah.
You changed popular music with those two records. I mean,
I
was happily going along in my little hip-hop world, and I heard those two records, and I called Herb and said, Herb, you got to get me some more stuff like that. I want to do that. I mean...
Yeah. I have to give some credit, Dave, where it's due, though. In Mark Ronson and Paul Epworth, I'm working with two of the super talented producers right now who have very clear aesthetic of what they're trying to convey, and obviously two of the great female vocalists of the last 20 years, and sadly one of them's not here, but if you're lucky enough, and I have been to have been around a couple of artists that are at the top of their game lyrically, melodically, and two producers who have such a clean grasp of arrangement, sound, direction. My God, after Amy, I never thought I'd get it again, but with Adele, I've just been super lucky. I gotta. But these guys are good,
If you notice what Dave said, let's just focus on that for a second. 400, 900, 3K 18 dB reduction with probably a super tight Q at all those frequencies. Now, he's taken out stuff that bothers him, which goes to a point and a way he mixes that some people don't really think about, I think, which is when you first start mixing, like the first time you hear the song when you're sitting in the chair ready to mix, not when you're prepping, not when you're editing or getting the session ready to work. That should happen on a different day. But when you're sitting there about to mix, the first thing you should focus on is not what you like, it's what hurts or what annoys you or what the stuff is that bugs you, because that will at least guide you towards what to do. And that's why I always recommend mixing with everything in and just get the stuff out of the way that's in the way. So that means if there's stuff that's distracting you, like auxiliary stuff, you could mute it, but you don't have to mute it. You could just make it lower and get it out of the way. To me, that's the best way to deal with it. Just get it where it's not distracting you. However low you have to make it, wherever you have to pan it to get it out of the way, get your panning right, get your levels where your faders are in the right place just from your initial gut reaction of the most important elements, the beat, the vocals, the main driving instruments, the bass. Get that stuff sitting nice and put the stuff that's distracting below it. And then at that point, what bugs you? Because what bugs you will lead you towards, okay, everything's fine, but as opposed to the other way, where you try to make a sound you like a little better and then try to make the next sound you like a little better. I don't like working in that way. I was helping somebody with a mix recently where when we got to a point in the song, it felt like all of a sudden the mix was very lopsided. When they played that mix for me, their mind wasn't there. Their mind was like, how do we make this guitar sound better? Well, I'm like, first of all, I can't even tell what, this guitar should sound like, the one you're trying to work on, because we lost the balance. Like we're all lopsided all of a sudden. What happened on the left? And where's that? And there was a guitar there that was much lower in comparison. So it's like, we got to, first of all, make that comparable, because the decision we make with the guitar on the right needs to be informed by what's going on the left. So we can't just make this in a vacuum, this decision making over here to then, and I know it's flipped on the camera, but you get what I'm saying. My right is actually your left, my left, your right. But the point is, when we're listening, I can't make decisions on EQs and stuff until there's a balance restored of weight. Otherwise, I'm like this. It's all pushing to the right. There's not enough on the left. So no matter what we do over here, how could you make that right? So that's working in a vacuum. So I try to correct what bugs me. And when we got to that part in the song, what bugged me was this. Once we got that set, now it's what frequencies are in the way or rubbing me, where I gotta, cut something, get it out of the way. Don't be afraid to do what he said. You see, everybody said, he's like, I don't look at the screen. He's like, well, of course I do a little bit, for all the people who are going to say, of course you got to look at the screen. You got to just glance at it. But the point is, he's cutting using some plugin Dave mentioned, probably something like, at this point, all those years ago, like an EQ7 band or something like that, you would think. Something like that, probably. And he was cutting 18 dB at all those frequencies because it needed it. So other helpful tip, which I've told people before, this is helpful when you're trying to dial in where the right amount of something to cut is or boost. Close your eyes while you're manipulating the mouse, because you're going to click it with a mouse, and then if you click and push up with the mouse, it's going to go higher. If you click and pull it down, it's going to go lower. So just close your eyes, and then just go up and down many times so you kind of lose where it is, and then find it. Do you want more? Do you want less? And then when you open your eyes and look at it, you'll be very surprised. This also helps with parallel compression. Parallel compression, where you create another channel. So you duplicate it, or you mult it, or you send it to an aux, or whatever you want to do to create your parallel, right? And then when you blend that in with the original signal, a lot of people get hung up on the number. In other words, they see the original signal's at 0, and now the parallel is at, -1, or maybe it should be lower. They think, it should be lower than the original. It shouldn't be the same volume. So they make it like -20, -10. They just try to live with it there. It's like, nah, man, close your eyes. Put your finger on the fader with the mouse, click it. Now, close your eyes at that point, right? Then move the mouse wait till it sits right where it needs to, and then open your eyes and see where it is, because it doesn't matter what the number is. On some songs, you may want the parallel louder. On some songs, you want it lower. Like, there's no right way to do this. The reason you do the parallel is to get the transient happening on the original track and then some flavored parallel smush blended in to give you more apparent something. And sometimes you might want more of that than the transient, but the transient could still poke through. But a lot of times it's about where you sit it in order for for you to decide if it works or not. So you can't have it at the wrong volume and even really judge it. So that's where closing your eyes and setting it will really help you, especially in the DAW-based world we live in. Because if you didn't have that, you would just manipulate the fader. You'd kind of see where it is in relation to the other track, but you wouldn't be so hung up on the GUI telling you, you know, how loud you are before you're clipping the channel or how much gain you have go. Like, you wouldn't be so hung up in the numbers. The numbers don't mean anything. I hate to say it, they don't mean anything, especially on things like EQ. You as long as you get back at some point that volume that you took up above where it was clipping, it doesn't matter. It's not like it was years ago where if you clipped at any particular point, it was a huge problem. Now, as long as you pull it down somewhere at the very end, you could pull it all down, you'll be fine. You know, so there's stipulations to this, obviously. Certain things, if you hit too hard, don't recover, like compression, saturation, things like that. But EQ, which is what we're referring to at the moment, you know, you could be okay if you're taking an EQ and you're really like, maybe this is what some people do also. They go the other way, like a Nick Launay thing, where he'll use a tight Q and boost to create a resonance at some frequency. Now, that could be the fundamental of the kick, for example, or the snare, but it could be around the fundamental. It's whatever feels right. And the way you find what it feels right, where it feels right, is you close your eyes, you slide it around. The way you find how much of a boost you want, you close your eyes, you slide it around. But if you look at Nick Launay's mixes, and he's done some amazing stuff, specifically like recently, that band, the Idols, they did a Tiny Desk. It was so good, way better than I thought it could ever be for a band like that to play in a place that was like, with the dryness of Tiny Desk. It was so good to watch that. But like Idols, he basically mixed that with another dude also. But I was just, I forget which. Maybe it wasn't even that song. I was watching him mix something, and he basically boosted at a tight Q a ton of, a ton of information on the lows to get the kick drum to poke out where he wanted. So, and he did it on like an EQ7 band, and I'd made a video on showing kind of what he did a ways back. So you could find that on my channel. Now, tons of other stuff here we could get into, but I'm just going to leave it there for the moment because we're already kind of approaching the time. And everybody should realize, don't look at this as, oh man, so much information. Just absorb what you can absorb and then come back later, absorb the rest. There's plenty of stuff to absorb. And when you're trying to make a good mix, learning all this stuff is helpful. Like Tom's style of fader balance being most important and EQ, being a secondary importance to the fader balance is a good way to think about it. I've often thought about it almost the opposite way, which is when you EQ low end, for example, and you increase the low end, what you're basically doing is increasing a fader of the low end. Like, I think about all my EQ knobs as faders, so that you really kind of consider, do we need to bring up the entirety of this instrument on a fader, or should we just bring up the high end, which is essentially allowing you to bring the fader down a little, but still get some high end out of it now, instead of, we're bringing up the whole thing. And there's no right way or wrong way, but do whatever works for you on your specific song. I like the way he's thinking here. And if you want to try working in that way, where you use some plug-in emulations, use something like a Neve VR emulation plugin, or just anything really, but just cut only in the beginning of whatever you do before you then deal with faders. So get your balance right in the beginning, make it as good as you can. Then deal with cutting the stuff out of the way that bugs you. Okay. Then deal with adding back anything else. Now, but anything else could be done with an EQ or a compressor or a saturator or flavor, but he sort of works in that way where his console is his first step. But what he may do is actually hit it first. Like he may cut, like Dave said, use the plugin. So he probably used something like an EQ7 to cut 18 dB or whatever, then fed the console with that, I would imagine, rather than doing it the other way around. I don't believe he does that because he goes to the console, then he goes to his curve bender, then he goes to his Manley Varimu. And the way he hits the curve bender he's mentioned is simple: 90 hertz, sometimes a lot of a boost or a little, depends on what the song needs, but 90 hertz and 20K. So super high top air to make it sound bright and airy and nice. And this is on his mix bus. He'll add as much 20K as he needs and then 90 hertz. So that's all he really does, he said, on his curve bender. Maybe there's some exceptions to this and that, but that's the gist of it. So hope that helps. Take that with you. Questions, answers, throw it in there. Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. Way more tips to come. Talk to you guys soon. You guys got this. Take it easy.